I did, and she was right. Another small sign during my stay in jail happened one day when I was looking for certain scripture passages from the Bible. It was one I really liked, but I couldn't remember it verbatim. It had to do with keeping the faith, and I really needed to read it so I could continue to work my way out of my depression. Later that day, I got a card from a woman from my home church. Inside the card was a bookmark with the passage I was looking for on it. If ye have faith as a grain of a mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. I was determined that no matter what happened in court, I was going to be okay as long as I kept my faith in God. With so much uncertainty in my life at this point, God was all I had to believe in. And understand, from after being sentenced, there was a magazine called Emerge Magazine that wanted to highlight a story about a first-time nonviolent drug offender who had been sentenced egregiously. And it was a decision with my parents and myself that we would do the interview. I was very scared. My mother, come on, moms in the room. My mom was not for it, really. But my dad kind of talked her into it. But from doing that, there was a lot of reaction from it. It was a 21-page article where I was on the cover, and basically the NAACP Legal Defense Fund had decided that they were going to take on my case pro bono. But understand, it wasn't because they felt sorry for poor little Kemba or they felt sorry for my parents. They wanted to take on this issue of first-time nonviolent drug offenders and this issue of crack versus powder cocaine, and they had hoped that my case would set a precedent for others. But basically my only source of relief, because we filed brief after brief, petition after petition in the courts, and the courts would not hear anything. The attorney that I had that was friends with the prosecutor was willing to testify that he gave me ineffective assistance of counsel because of his relationship, but they would never give us the opportunity to do that. So our only source of relief was through executive clemency. And so December 2000, and let me back up. Executive clemency, what is that? It's not having a clean slate. Ultimately, executive clemency is just time served. So I still have a record, but in order to get executive clemency, it wasn't something that was an easy process. There were several organizations that came on board, such as the NAACP Legal Defense Fund I mentioned, the ACLU, the National Association of Negro Women, the Links, the Deltas. I can remember being in prison, and there was a period of time where I was writing letters to certain organizations asking for help and letting them know what was going on, and received no response. But if you just wait on God and His timing, He will make things happen when it's supposed to happen. And ultimately, I can remember helping cleaning up the visitation room, and the prison staff was really in hysterics because they were trying to get everything in order in the prison. And ultimately, it was Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia that was coming to visit the prison, and who do you think he was coming to visit? Me. And ultimately, in that visit, it was just him and I, and he basically said that he was going to do whatever he needed to do to push this executive clemency. And then also, too, on top of that, the power of black women. I mentioned the National Council of Negro Women, the Deltas, the Links. Those three presidents came up to the prison in a white limousine. I can remember the correctional officers saying, who are these three black women coming to visit you in a limousine? And in my mind, I'm just like, you just don't know, do you? But ultimately, they told me that they were going to stick it out and wanted to see my case have justice. But it wasn't just, again, about just me. It was about the fastest growing population within prison at the time and still today are black women. And so again, they had hoped that my case would set a precedent. But after being released in December 2000, that's why I remain committed, because ultimately I have gone through and continue to go through this feeling of survivor's guilt. Because ultimately I'm grateful for what God has done for me, but some of the time I do say, well, why is such and such still in prison? Why was I freed? Because there are so many other Kemba Smiths who are still sitting in federal prison. So that's why I've been committed in going up to the Hill, telling my personal testimony, working with organizations such as the Sentencing Project, the ACLU, Drug Policy Alliance. And, you know, there has been some progress. Has the progress been enough? No, it has not. I've spoken on Congresswoman Maxine Waters' panel every year since I've been home and worked with her closely on this particular issue. The crack versus powder cocaine issue, it used to be 100-to-1 ratio. Are any of you all familiar with that? And President Obama in 2010 reduced the disparity to 18-to-1. But Charles Ogletree, who's a law professor at Harvard University, Maxine Waters, and myself and many others feel as if that is not enough. 18-to-1 is not good enough for us. It needs to be 1-to-1. But along with other things that I have advocated towards since my release has been this issue of felony disenfranchisement. Because when I was released from federal prison, I was on supervised release for 5 years, where I had to report to a probation officer. He came to my job, he came to my home. I had to ask permission to travel outside of the state of Virginia. He wanted me to record my speeches and actually sat down and watched them and took notes and had me in his office and told me what I should and shouldn't be saying. I had to do urine tests, I had to give blood, but I didn't care about all the hoops and hurdles because I was going to do what I needed to do to stay out of prison. And I still was going to say whatever I wanted to say because I knew God had my back. But ultimately, I was not afforded the opportunity to vote in the 2008 elections. And that deeply saddened me. I did work with the National Organization for Black Civic Participation to help with the Get Out the Vote effort. But ultimately, I was not able to vote. And I felt as if it was very unfair because I pay taxes, I do everything that every law-abiding citizen does, and ultimately the right to vote is a basic human fundamental right. The blessing that I had was that God did bring a young man on my path, and we ended up getting married in 2009. And in 2010, I moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. And I happened to go into the BMV, and someone had told me, you know, Kemba, just fill out the voter registration form and see what happens. And my voter ID card came in the mail, and I was able to vote into the local elections in the state of Indiana. But then July of this past year, I moved back to the state of Virginia. And I had to go through the same issue because Virginia makes you go through a waiting period before you can even apply to get your rights restored. And if you have a drug offense, you automatically have to wait a mandatory 5 years. So that's why I wasn't able to apply beforehand because I had moved to Indiana. But ultimately, last year I did apply. But I also had the fortunate opportunity to work with the NAACP National and traveling to Switzerland twice to go to the United Nations to speak about voter suppression laws in the United States. It was a very humbling, and I say this not for myself. I'm saying this because God is no respecter of persons. And I'm not sitting here telling you these things like I did them on my own. I am just me. I'm actually still trying to put the pieces together in my life. And I'm just being obedient to God and letting him use me as a vessel. But never in a million years would I have imagined being in the United Nations talking to certain officials about this particular issue of felony disenfranchisement, something that was affecting me and representing over 5 million people in our country. Ultimately, there were other countries that just couldn't believe that this was actually going on in the United States. But fortunately, October the 5th, Governor McDonald for the state of Virginia restored my voting rights, and I was able to vote in this election, this past election. And there was actually a press conference that same day where they restored where I received the news, and it was that news conference. I was a hot mess. Like I had snot coming out my nose and everything. But that was because when I was in prison, I I didn't get that black history knowledge while I was in college at Hampton University, at one of the most prestigious historically black universities there are. It actually took me going inside of prison, where I met two white women who taught a black history class. And I can remember some of the other women saying, we're not going to that class because what are these two white women going to teach us about black history? And in my mind, I was like, shoot, I don't have anything else to do. Let me go see what they're talking about. I go in this class, and I see these two, the two white women were there for political reasons, and they had been in prison for over 15 years. And ultimately, I soaked in all the information that I could soak in from them, because in my mind, I was just like, this is not right. I need to step up my game and know more about me. Because young people, I feel as if we had more knowledge about our past, how far we've come, that you would have a better appreciation for where we are today, and also make those healthy choices to continue the legacy to move even far beyond what our ancestors have done. On the plane ride, I was reading a book that was talking about Fannie Lou Hamer and some of her challenges, and how she was such a hard worker, and from the age of 6 working in the fields picking cotton, and how she thrived for knowledge and, you know, wanting to read a book. And here we have kids today that won't even pick up a book to open it. You got to appreciate the struggle and the journey of where we are. Don't get caught up in the Facebook and social media. There's a time and place for everything. You better make sure that you're investing that time and energy in getting knowledge for self, and figuring out what that dream, goal, vision is of where you want to go in life and what you want to become, and start investing some energy in how you're going to get there. Right? You know, I'm going to stop because I'm going to end up keep going on and on. But if I grew up in a day and time where there was an African-American president, that off the top shows you that anything is possible for us as a people. And the way to get there is through your education. Therefore, you don't have time for the pettiness in school. In the school building, it's like your job. You got to be about your business. If one of your teachers, they're not about their job, you need to go talk to somebody and make sure they're on their job. You need to make sure that you are using each and every person that you come in contact with in that school setting to help you get to that goal, vision of what you invest in that time and energy into, and what you want to become. Because it's not going to come to you on a silver platter. And so, in closing, because I do want to give the opportunity that if anyone wants to ask any questions, please understand that our community is in need. It's in a state of emergency, in my opinion. And I travel across the country and I talk to youth, and that's why it's so, you know, moving for me to see young people actually doing positive things and in the church. But I see so many of our youth coming up to me afterwards one-on-one because I've shared with them my ordeal. They feel a connection with me, and they want to share with me what they're going through. Stuff that'll make you want to fall down on your knees and just boo-hoo cry for hours. So please understand that we have some work to do, and that we need to make sure that we're connecting with our youth, that we're speaking up for those policies that affect us the most. And who cares what other people think? We need to be doing what we need to be doing for ourselves as a people. I know for my parents, I thank God that they didn't care about what people thought. Because sometimes if you have a family member that's incarcerated, you don't want other people to know because you think it's an embarrassment or a shame. But I can remember being in the television room in prison, seeing my dad on CNN talking about these same issues. So please keep up the fight. Understand that we still have a lot of work to do. I'm going to end with this quote from Martin Luther King, where he says, "On some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe?